I lay in bed, my awareness surrounded by a heavy fog, everything around me blurry and unclear. Yet Emily's pale white face was exceptionally clear in the midst of it all, like the brightest star on a dark night, deeply imprinted in my mind. It was a strikingly beautiful face, one that had often appeared in my dreams, but now, as my life was about to end, it slowly became distant and hard to grasp. As I was about to breathe my last, it felt as if an invisible force was rapidly draining the strength from my body. Yet, I still used all my remaining energy to force a faint smile, struggling to focus my eyes on her face. With a voice as weak as a candle flame flickering in the wind, I asked, "In these 50 years of marriage, have you ever truly loved me, even for a single day?" Seeing her standing there, her lips trembling slightly, hesitating to speak, I already knew the answer. 50 years, this long, long journey felt like it had no end. I slowly moved my gaze away from her face and looked around the room filled with people, all descendants of Emily and me. Their faces showed sadness and reluctance, yet my heart was filled with exhaustion and despair from this long marriage. Finally, as if I had finally put down the burden I had carried for a lifetime, I spoke my last words to her. If I could live it all over again, I would never love you. After saying this, I felt as if I was being pulled into an endless abyss of darkness by a powerful force, my eyes closing forever. I don't know how long it had been, but when I opened my eyes again, I found that I had actually been reborn. At that moment, shock and joy surged through me like a wave, and I could hardly believe it was real. Heaven has given me a chance to start again. This time, I secretly promised myself, deep down, to stay away from Emily and never repeat the same mistakes. Like a moth that had once blindly flown into the flame, burned to ashes by that seemingly beautiful yet deadly fire in my past life. This time, I will resolutely find my own path to the light. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, it was 3 months before the college entrance exams. That day, sunlight streamed through the classroom windows, casting patterned shadows on the desks. Classmates were excitedly discussing exam topics or sharing funny stories from school, while I sat at my desk, deeply engrossed in my books, trying to absorb the knowledge. Suddenly, the noise in the classroom stopped. I curiously looked up and saw Emily. She had actually transferred to my class and had directly requested to sit at the same desk as me. In an instant, memories from my past life rushed over me like a tidal wave, and my heart tightened sharply, instinctively. I moved the chair aside, trying to create distance between us. This woman, who had once left me so deeply hurt, I no longer wanted to be near. But she was like a quick cat, grabbing my collar and pulling me back forcefully. Her strength was surprising, and I looked up in shock to see her lips curled into a sly smile as she said, "William, why were you in such a hurry to leave? In your last life, you asked me a question, and I haven't answered it yet." At that moment, I felt as if I had been struck by lightning, leaving me completely stunned. When I regained my senses, I realized that I had truly returned to the time 3 months before the college entrance exams, a period filled with hope and endless possibilities. I first felt this young and vibrant body, feeling every cell joyfully alive, as if celebrating this hard-won rebirth. Then, I looked around at my classmates who were focused on the lesson, the sunlight casting a golden glow on their energetic faces, making me truly realize that this was not a dream. Perhaps it was indeed the intense longing I had at the moment of my death in my previous life that granted me this precious opportunity to start over. Since heaven has been so kind to me, in this life, I must firmly stick to my original intention and completely cut ties with Emily. Recalling my past life, due to the serious difficulties faced by Emily's family's company, they proposed a marriage alliance, hoping to collaborate with my family's company to overcome the crisis. Emily was well known in school as a talented girl, excelling in her studies and full of talent, like a brilliant pearl radiating dazzling light on campus. Later, she further established herself as an internationally renowned violin virtuoso, thanks to her exceptional musical gifts. As for me, I was just that student sitting by the window in the back row of the classroom, spending my days aimlessly and only managing to get into an ordinary, third-rate university. After graduation, following my family's arrangements, I joined the family business to learn, and then took over my father's career, struggling and striving in the marketplace. At that time, because Emily was beautiful, graceful, and well-educated, my father was very pleased with her and readily agreed to the marriage. As a young and impulsive man, I was also captivated by her beauty and charm, and happily accepted this engagement. But who could have imagined that Emily had already fallen in love with someone else? She had grown up with that boy, and they were perfectly in tune with each other. Her heart had long been given entirely to him. However, for the sake of the family's interests, her relatives forcibly separated them and married her off to me. Fate is so cruel and mocking. After the wedding, Emily was never happy. No matter how hard I tried to treat her well, carefully selecting expensive jewelry for her, planning the most romantic dates, she remained as cold as ice, never giving me a warm smile, like a towering iceberg that never melted, standing between us. So it was only at the end of my life that I desperately asked that question, and the answer was like a sharp dagger, deeply piercing my heart. In this lifetime, I will never allow myself to fall into such a painful abyss again. I do not intend to interfere too much in the business cooperation between the two families. In my memory, a few years later, Emily's family company will rise rapidly, expanding beyond everyone's expectations. My family also gained considerable benefits from our collaboration with her family, and our business is thriving. Therefore, I will not disrupt the cooperative relationship between the two families, but I no longer need to maintain it through marriage. In this life, I have my own goals and pursuits, which is to make the most of my time and study hard to make up for the regrets left from my previous life. In my last life, due to my laziness, I only managed to get into a third-rate university, which has always been a hidden pain in my heart. This time I must give my all to get into a key undergraduate university, and then use the knowledge and experience I have accumulated over the extra 50 years of my life to fulfill my father's unfinished wish and take the family company's products to the international market. So, during the days leading up to the college entrance exams, I was like a mad seeker of knowledge, fully immersed in my studies. My classmates were all astonished by my transformation, and their eyes were filled with confusion and disbelief as they looked at me. In the past, as soon as the class bell rang, I would rush out like a wild horse, heading to the basketball court or running to the bathroom to smoke. But now, I seemed like a completely different person. Some classmates, seeing my unusual behavior, couldn't help but exclaim, "William, what's wrong with you? You're not going to play basketball or smoke in the bathroom after class anymore? Have you been possessed by something?" I looked up and smiled as I replied, "I traveled back from 50 years in the future. Not getting into a good university in my past life has been my regret, so I want to work hard to make up for it." My deskmate rolled his eyes, dismissive of my words. In his impression, a problem student like me, sitting by the window in the back row of the classroom, was just a slacker who thought it was a pipe dream to get into a top university. However, I don't care about other people's opinions. After all, even I sometimes find the idea of reincarnation too bizarre. One evening, half a month later, the afterglow of the setting sun painted the sky a brilliant red, resembling a beautiful painting. I was still buried in my studies in the classroom when my father called, asking me to come home early after school, saying that guests would be visiting in the evening. He specifically reminded me to buy some gifts that girls would like. I understood in my heart that it must be Emily's family coming, and a complex emotion stirred within me. Last time I received this call, I was filled with joy and racked my brain thinking about what gift to buy for her. Considering we were still in high school, things like cash or handbags didn't seem appropriate, so I ran through the streets and alleys, carefully selecting several large bags of gifts, including cute big doll toys, exquisite crafts, and so on. But in the end, Emily merely glanced at those gifts with indifference, a hint of disdain flashing in her eyes, and coldly said, "These things are too childish. It's hard to imagine living with someone like you in the future." Her words were like a bucket of cold water, instantly dousing the enthusiasm in my heart. But this lifetime, I will never be as foolish as I was last time. I also bought several large bags of things, but they were all filled with toys for children, like toy cars, Barbie dolls, and remote control cars. I carried these gifts and casually walked back home. As soon as I stepped inside, seeing 18-year-old Emily again, I couldn't help but be momentarily stunned. She was still as beautiful and captivating as ever, exuding a noble aura amidst her cool demeanor, as if she were a princess who had stepped out of a fairy tale. In my past life, during this very meeting, I was utterly enchanted by her, but this time I was only briefly dazed before immediately reminding myself to stay alert and not let her charm me again. When my father saw me come back carrying so many things, his eyes immediately lit up. He quickly gave me a knowing look and then pretended to be unaware, saying, "Son, you brought so many gifts for Emily on your first meeting? Why haven't you ever been this thoughtful towards me before?" I curled my lip, too lazy to pay him any mind, and walked directly into the living room with the bag, casually tossing it on the floor as I did. The toys inside scattered everywhere, and the wheels of the remote control car fell off. I wiped my hands nonchalantly and looked at Emily, who was standing there with a cold expression, and said slowly, "Dad asked me to bring this for you. I was short on time, so I bought it at a roadside stall. Next time they'll get you something of better quality at the big supermarket." When my father saw those things on the ground that looked like toys for children, his expression suddenly turned very ugly, and in his anger, he picked up the spatula and was about to come over and hit me. However, I wasn't scared at all. I silently thought to myself, I lived to be 70 in my last life, and my father is only 45 now, so technically, I should be the elder. So I comfortably laid back on the sofa, crossed my legs, and deliberately spoke in the tone of a grandparent scolding a grandchild, saying, "At your age, you should have some semblance of an adult. What kind of behavior is this?" My words left my father, as well as Emily and her parents, stunned. They clearly did not expect me to react this way. After a while, my father's face, which had turned red with anger, slowly regained some color as he awkwardly explained, "The relationship between my son and me is good. There are no outsiders at home, so he speaks quite casually and didn't consider you as outsiders." Emily's parents listened to this explanation, and smiles appeared on their faces, as if the awkward situation that had just occurred had never happened. Only Emily. She always wore a stern face, frowning, perhaps thinking in her heart that I would still be as devoted to her in this life as I was in the last. She was mistaken. In this life, I will never waste another 50 years with someone who doesn't love me. Thinking of this, I walked up to her and said, coldly, "Since you don't like the gift I bought, I'll just put it away and play with it myself." After saying that, I reached out to grab the toys, but unexpectedly, she suddenly snatched a Barbie princess from my hand, and for the first time, revealed a smile I had never seen before. The corners of her mouth slightly raised, her eyes sparkling with surprise, as she softly said, "Thank you, I really like it." This scene left me so shocked that I couldn't speak. She actually smiled at me. This is simply unbelievable. as if the sun were rising from the west, defying all logic. "This Barbie princess is one I bought for myself. The rest are yours," I quickly explained. Upon hearing my words, they all showed puzzled expressions. My father finally couldn't hold back, and loudly scolded me for being crazy because my behavior today was truly too unusual. I originally thought this would make Emily angry, and then we could completely sever ties, but I didn't expect her to hold those toys as if they were rare treasures, unable to let them go. In my past life, when I gave her those expensive jewelry and bags, she didn't even glance at them. Has her taste really changed? I was filled with doubt. The sky gradually darkened. It was time for dinner. At the dining table, my father and Emily's parents were like two enthusiastic salespeople, eagerly trying to match me and Emily, constantly talking about how well-suited we were as a couple. Meanwhile, I felt like a cold stone, sitting there unmoved. I know that Emily has a childhood friend in her heart, a boy she grew up with, and their bond is deep. In her past life, I heard that Emily originally planned to confess her feelings to him after graduating high school, but my appearance disrupted their plans. In this life, I only want to fulfill their wishes and have no further ties with Emily. Until midnight, the night outside was as deep as thick ink. Emily and her family were about to leave, and during this time I hadn't said a word to her. My father pulled me to see them off at the door. And just as they were about to leave, Emily suddenly said she had forgotten her backpack on the sofa. My father then asked me to help get it. Although I was very reluctant, I couldn't go against my father's wishes, so I helplessly brought her the backpack and handed it to her. After she took the backpack, she quietly thanked me. She actually said thank you to me. This is truly the biggest joke I've ever heard in my 2 lifetimes. My expression remained indifferent, and I didn't respond to her. I simply turned around and went back to my room. Behind me, I could faintly hear my father explaining to them that I had not been in a good mood lately and that I was not usually like this, hoping it wouldn't affect the marriage between our 2 families. I couldn't help but think to myself, if my father knew that I wasn't happy in my past life, would he still be so eager to match me with someone I don't love? The next day I went to school with my backpack as usual. The sunlight filtered through the gaps in the leaves, casting patches of golden light on the path in the campus, as if paving a road to the future for me. I walked into the classroom, found my seat, and had just sat down when the class bell rang. The class had just reached the halfway point when the homeroom teacher suddenly walked into the classroom, wearing a mysterious smile, and said, "Today, we have a new student in our class." Then, a figure appeared at the classroom door, and I was stunned. It was Emily. Today she had her hair tied up in a high ponytail, with a few strands of hair dancing in the wind in front of her forehead, like willow branches swaying in the spring breeze, full of life and vitality. Her eyes were bright and clear, like twinkling stars in the night sky, radiating a charming glow. The homeroom teacher briefly introduced her, saying that she came from the first high school and had been at the top of her class there. With her abilities, it would not be an exaggeration to say that she could become the best in our 3rd high school. Emily is not only sweet and charming in appearance, but also dresses in a youthful and vibrant manner. Her white dress, paired with a simple pair of white shoes, gives her an air of freshness and elegance, much like a lily blooming in the summer morning. The boys in the class were instantly excited when they saw her, with a few of them even calling out loudly for Emily to come over and sit with them, disregarding the ongoing lesson. Their voices rose and fell, and the classroom quickly became noisy. However, it was soon silenced by the stern gaze of the homeroom teacher. Like a cold wind blowing through, they immediately quieted down. The homeroom teacher glanced at the empty seat next to the class monitor. The monitor's previous deskmate had dropped out due to a family emergency, leaving the position vacant. Therefore, the homeroom teacher planned to arrange for Emily to sit next to the class monitor. Who knew that Emily shook her head, her gaze firm as she walked straight towards me. She reached out her hand when she got in front of me, her face blooming with a smile like the warm sun of spring, and said, "We meet again. May I sit next to you?" I was instantly stunned, my mind blank, as if time had stopped. Before I could react, let alone refuse, she asked again, "William, may I sit next to you?" At this moment, the homeroom teacher also walked over and said to her with a somewhat anxious expression, "Emily, you don't know, but William is at the bottom of our class and often holds the class back. Your grades are so good. You should sit with excellent students. Go sit with the class monitor. They are the top student in the whole school, and you can learn from each other and make progress together." I wasn't angry at what the homeroom teacher said because it was indeed a fact. Although I wasn't a bad student in high school, I also wasn't the diligent and studious type. When I had free time, I liked to skip class to go to internet cafes outside of school or play basketball on the playground. Speaking of grades, I could single-handedly lower the class average by several points. However, because I didn't engage in any bad behavior like fighting or brawling, the homeroom teacher usually turned a blind eye to me. Emily did not hesitate to refuse the homeroom teacher's arrangement, smiling as she said to the teacher, "Thank you for your kindness, but I would like to sit with William. I want to get to know him." The homeroom teacher frowned, a hint of helplessness and worry flashing in her eyes. She glanced at me, then at Emily, repeatedly urging me not to affect Emily's studies. After all, her grades were expected to challenge for the top spot in the province. As she spoke, she shook her head continuously, as if she had already envisioned a scene of me leading Emily astray. I secretly thought to myself that the homeroom teacher really treasures Emily too much, but I can understand. If Emily really becomes the top student, the homeroom teacher will definitely gain both fame and fortune. However, none of this concerns me. In this life, I only want to get into college, study finance well, and then use the experience I accumulated in my previous life to elevate my family to a higher level. With a firm determination, I expressionlessly extended my hand to block the seat next to me and said, "I'm used to sitting alone and don't want anyone beside me. Also, classmate Emily, we don't know each other. We only met last night. You should change your seat to avoid affecting your studies." The classroom fell silent in an instant, and my classmates looked at me in surprise, as if they couldn't believe I would reject a beauty of Emily's caliber who was both a top student and a campus queen. Emily was momentarily stunned, but soon regained that familiar, proud expression. She directly placed her backpack on the table, forcefully pushed my hand away, sat down in the seat, and with a hint of defiance at the corner of her mouth said, "This seat isn't yours. I can sit wherever I want." Seeing her like this, I felt a surge of irritation in my heart. In my past life, I endured her face for 50 years. But now that I've been reborn, I really don't know how I managed to hold on back then. I angrily slammed the book in my hand down on the table, making a loud bang that startled Emily. I said coldly, "Fine, sit wherever you want. I have no right to interfere." After saying that, I quickly started packing my backpack, stuffing my textbook and stationery into it all at once, then picked up my things and walked directly to the spot next to the trash can. This area, usually piled up with garbage, had a faint smell of decay and was also cluttered with brooms, dustpans, and other cleaning tools. I paid no attention to it, pushed the clutter aside, heavily placed my backpack down, then reached for the basketball on the ground and waved to a few guys in the back row by the window, who were the main players on the school basketball team. These guys immediately understood and happily followed me to the playground, ready to play ball. From the classroom behind us came the angry shouts of the homeroom teacher. "What a rotten apple, ruining the whole pot!" I took this as background noise. I wasn't harming his good students. The guys following me were already part of that so-called bad soup, and they didn't need me to lead them astray. Who says that underachievers are bad students? In my memory, they all developed quite well in the future, and the worst off among them even bought a big house in the city center. Although everyone had poor grades, that didn't mean their character and abilities were lacking. It was just that their minds weren't focused on studying. So I didn't go to class that morning and played basketball with them on the playground. The sound of the basketball hitting the ground echoed in the air, and our shouts and laughter intertwined. Sweat soaked our clothes, but we were immersed in the joy of the sport. After finishing the last game at noon, I felt parched. My throat felt like it was on fire, and I was ready to go buy some ice water to quench my thirst and cool down. Suddenly, a figure hurriedly walked over, and before I could see who it was, they handed me a bottle of water, saying, "Here you go. It's not cold. It's best not to drink cold water right after exercising." Then I finally realized it was Emily. A few classmates nearby saw this scene and were sneaking glances at me, stifling their laughter. One of them joked, "William, I didn't know you had such charm. We're all so envious." Another classmate chimed in, "Yeah, and it's not even cold. This water is really thoughtful." I was a bit infuriated by what they said, and I shot them a fierce glare, saying, "Don't talk nonsense, or next time, sir, I'll give you a slam dunk from a distance." I'm 1.8 meters tall and a key player on the basketball team, so a slam dunk is definitely not a problem. Then I looked at Emily, my expression once again turning cold, like a block of ice in winter, and said without a hint of warmth, "No need, I'm used to drinking it cold. Classmate Emily, although our families have business cooperation, let's forget about the idea of a marriage alliance. I know you have a childhood sweetheart whom you really like, and I'm not interested in you either, so there's no need for us to get to know each other. I will make it clear to my father, and it won't affect the business cooperation between our families. This is better for both of us." After speaking, I returned the water to her, picked up the basketball, and turned to leave. I thought to myself, rather than getting entangled with her again and repeating the mistakes of my past life, it would be better to draw a clear line with her as soon as possible. Because the school is not far from home, only about a 20-minute journey, I usually go home for lunch and rest. I arrived at the bus stop to wait for the bus, and at that moment, Emily hurriedly jogged over from a distance, her face pale, and grabbed me tightly. I know she is angry because I just refused her water. It was the same in the last life. As long as I didn't go along with her wishes, she would fly into a rage. But in this life, she's no longer my wife, and I will not indulge her like I did before. I was just about to forcefully shake off her hand when, unexpectedly, her strength suddenly increased, and she pushed me against the bus stop sign. She tightly grasped my shoulders, her eyes filled with resentment, as she said, "William, don't think you're the only one who has been reborn. If you keep treating me like this, do you believe I will tell your father that you are bullying your future wife?" I heard this, and my mind went blank for a moment. It took me a while to come back to my senses. Emily has also been reborn. But from her various behaviors from yesterday to today, she doesn't seem like the person she was in her past life at all. It feels as if her soul has been swapped out. In my memory, Emily later became a powerful woman in the business world. In her youth, she navigated the market with great skill, and as she grew older, she became the pillar of her family, known as Mrs. William. Her influence outside was far greater than mine. She would never show weakness in front of me. Even when faced with enormous difficulties, she would not ask me for a single word of help, nor would she let me see her vulnerable side. However, I don't want to think too much about things I can't understand anymore. Since we've been reborn, let's each make up for the regrets of our past lives. Her childhood sweetheart from her previous life was torn apart by her family, forcing her to marry me, and she was never happy. As for me, I married a woman who doesn't love me, My father fell seriously ill due to the stress from the company and ultimately worked himself to death. I also live with the regret of not being able to fulfill my father's dying wish for the company's products to reach the world. I looked at Emily and said seriously, "Emily, since you have been reborn as well, that's great. In this life, I won't hold you back from your childhood sweetheart. And you don't need to get close to me for business cooperation. You were a business queen in your past life, and the knowledge you possess is enough for you to create brilliance again, even without my family's help. In the end, my heart feels as if it is being tugged by something, making it difficult to bear. This woman, after all, I have loved for 50 years. Letting go now is easier said than done. However, after experiencing the despair of my past life, I know I can no longer love her. Moreover, I understand that rather than pursuing someone who doesn't love me, it's better to wait for someone whose eyes are filled with me. At least with such a person, I can feel an abundance of love. Now, I'm willing to give my all to love someone who loves me, but I will never again love someone who does not love me. Emily? Goodbye." After saying that, I was about to turn and leave. At that moment, a deafening roar of a motorcycle came from behind, and I turned to look, only to see a person riding a cool motorcycle stopping in front of us. The person on the motorcycle took off their sunglasses, grinned at Emily, revealing a slightly yellowed set of teeth, and said, "Senior, I've come to pick you up. Why did you decide to transfer schools? It makes me drive an extra half hour every day to get you." I recognized this person as Emily's childhood friend, named Robert. His family started out in the electronics business, but later mismanaged it and lost quite a bit of money. The factory has been lukewarm for a long time, but their financial situation is still somewhat better than that of an average family. Emily became a partner in their family's electronics factory when she was a freshman, but later, for some unknown reason, she withdrew from the partnership. She grew up with Robert, and they had a very close relationship. Due to his father's factory being in poor condition, Robert was rarely supervised, and he started hanging out with delinquents, becoming a somewhat rebellious teenager. However, he treated Emily well and didn't lead her astray. At that time, Robert and I didn't know each other, and I didn't want to know him. I just glanced at him and turned away without hesitation. Behind me, I heard Emily stamping her feet in frustration, and she shouted loudly, "William, you jerk!" When I reached the intersection and waited for the traffic light, I instinctively turned around and saw Emily getting on Robert's motorcycle. I watched their figures fade into the distance, a wave of bitterness washing over me, feeling that I no longer had any attachment to her. In the end, she still chose her childhood sweetheart. I looked up at the glaring sun in the sky, my eyes stinging painfully, and tears flowed down my cheeks without me realizing it. I thought to myself, all that talk about love growing over time and mutual support is just a lie. I had invested 50 years of feelings, but coming back to life, I still couldn't compete with their childhood bond. When I got home, I asked my father for a few days off, not wanting to go to school. Although he was angry, he couldn't go against me because my mother passed away early, and he spoiled me, his only son. I told my father that I wanted to transfer schools, and he looked at me in shock. "The college entrance exam is coming up soon. Why would you transfer? Besides, your fiancée specifically transferred from the first high school to be with you. What will happen to her if you transfer now?" I waved my hand impatiently and said, "When did I agree to that, Dad? I told you I don't like her. She has someone she likes, and it's not me. A forced relationship is never sweet. If you keep pushing me, I'll jump from this 3rd floor to find Mom." Although our villa is only 3 stories high, it still stands over 10 meters tall. The initial impact is certainly more likely to bring misfortune than good luck. Every time I use my mother to threaten my father, it proves to be very effective, and this time is no exception. Because my mother and I look very much alike, my father often cries while looking at my mother's photos in the room. If he were to lose me, he might lose all hope. Father had no choice but to agree with me. All right, you calm down first and I'll contact the school for you. Then I finally smiled at my father and said, "This is my good dad. Don't worry, as long as I transfer schools, I will definitely get into a good university, work hard in finance, and come back to help you strive for success. Mom in heaven will bless us, father and son, to thrive." My father was so moved that he hugged me and cried for a long time. But the next day he sold me out, and Emily came to the house. She pushed open my bedroom door. I was still asleep, groggy, opening my eyes to see her skillfully walking to the window. With a swift motion, she pulled back the curtains, and sunlight flooded in, blinding me. I angrily said, "Emily, are you crazy? This is my home. What are you doing barging into my room?" Emily crossed her arms in front of her chest and said naturally, "Your home? Your room? I've lived here for 50 years. This is my home, my room." She still had that tone from her previous life. After we got married in our last life, we lived in this apartment, and my room became our wedding chamber. She directly opened my wardrobe, took out the clothes and underwear I often wore, and then lifted my blanket. Since I liked to sleep without clothes, my body was suddenly exposed in front of her. I quickly covered myself with my clothes and shouted, "Are you crazy?" Emily, looking at me in a fluster. She touched her chin and smiled, saying, "So you've had the habit of sleeping without clothes for a while now," I thought. "Get lost, you get lost," I shouted. "No matter what, I've had you under my thumb for 50 years. And even if you're reborn, don't think you can escape my grasp," Emily said with a smile. This makes me very angry. In my last life, after we got married, I knew she didn't like me. She mentioned divorce, but she refused because she was pregnant. In this life, heaven has given her freedom. Why is she still clinging to me? "Emily, all you will do is make me dislike you, even make me hate you." After I said that, she froze, standing there like a puppet. I no longer looked at her, focusing on putting on my clothes. My fingers mechanically fastened the buttons, but my mind was filled with the years I was let down by her in my past life, playing out like a movie on repeat. After finally getting dressed, I didn't want to stay a moment longer. I walked straight to the door, wanting to escape this place filled with memories and pain. Little did I know, just as I grasped the doorknob, Emily suddenly seemed to come to her senses and hugged me tightly from behind. I could feel her body heat, but that warmth only made me resist even more. She said eagerly, "William, I'm sorry. The questions I didn't answer in the last life, I will answer you in this life." I didn't wait for her to finish speaking. It was like being scalded, and without hesitation I shook off her hand, my voice as cold as ice shards. No need to say anything. I already knew the answer before I died in my last life. After loving you for 50 years, I can no longer love. I beg you to let me go. In this life, let's just be the most familiar strangers, okay? We are still young, only 18 years old. Time will dull everything, and you will slowly forget me, the person you don't love. We both have regrets from our last life. Let's make up for our regrets in this life." Emily's eyes suddenly turned red, tears swirling in her eyes before spilling over. She shook her head frantically, her hair flowing with her movements like a burning flame, saying, "No, you are my husband. Can you bear to give up 50 years of love?" I swallowed hard, my throat feeling as if it were stuck, looking at her tear-streaked face. My heart was filled with mixed emotions, but I steeled myself and said, "It would be a lie to say I don't care at all, but I don't want to repeat the same mistakes. I do care." Emily wiped away a tear with her hand. Although she looked a bit disheveled, her gaze was very determined as she said, "I know you don't believe me. In our last life, you treated me well for 50 years. So in this life, I'll treat you well for 50 years. No matter how I tried to persuade her, she was like a hard wall, impervious to both soft and hard approaches. I scoffed inwardly. How could she not seek out her childhood sweetheart, Robert? I didn't believe her claims of rebirth at all. It was definitely just her new trick. At that moment, my father saw Emily and me coming down the stairs, and a bright smile immediately spread across his face, his eyes squinting with joy as he said, "Come, come, son, daughter-in-law, I've made breakfast for you." I was already seething with anger, and hearing my father's words only made it worse. I shot him a fierce glare, as if it were all his fault. Then, I walked over to the dining table, grabbed a bun, and stormed out the door. I didn't expect Emily to grab a bun as well, following me without hesitation. I quickened my pace to run, and she ran right after me. When I could no longer run and stopped, she immediately stopped too. She was like my shadow, impossible to shake off, which made me feel flustered. I can't help but wonder why I didn't notice how annoying she was in my past life. For a full half-month, she was with me every moment. When I went to play basketball, she would quietly sit on the bench beside me, the scorching sun beating down on her. But she didn't care at all. Her eyes fixed on me on the court, like a loyal guardian. When I went online, she followed me into the internet cafe, sitting next to me at a computer. The cafe was filled with the smell of cigarettes, instant noodles, and the noisy sounds of games, yet she seemed oblivious, simply focused on watching a movie. Even when I went to the bathroom, she would wait outside for me. For a moment, the entire school was in an uproar. The students were puzzled. One was a super academic achiever, ranked first in the entire school, seen as a goddess high above everyone else. Why was she constantly surrounding someone like me, who was at the bottom of the class? There were even some malicious comments circulating, saying that I am a rich second generation, and that Emily wants to cling to me for a better life. But Emily completely ignores these rumors and continues to follow me every day, as if I am the only one in her world worthy of her attention. One morning, I woke up to find that Emily hadn't come to school. At first, I found it strange, but soon I felt a sense of relief in my heart. Without her following me that day, I felt the air was much fresher, like a little bird that had regained its freedom. This state of leisure continued until school was over, and she still hadn't shown up. I thought maybe something special had come up because it was the last Friday of the month, with a 2-day holiday coming up, and the college entrance exams approaching. My classmates felt the time was becoming increasingly tight. At that moment, a few friends from other classes who I had a good relationship with invited me to have a meal together, saying that once we went to university and went our separate ways, there wouldn't be many opportunities to gather like this anymore. Today, without Emily following along, I gladly agreed to join them. At a food stall, although this food stall looked simple and the shop wasn't large, the prices were affordable and the portions generous, making it especially suitable for us students who don't have much money. The table was filled with various delicacies, and we chatted and laughed while eating. By the time we finished dinner, it was already 10 o'clock. The streets at night were somewhat desolate, with the dim yellow light of the street lamps illuminating the pavement. We stood by the roadside, waving our hands to hail a taxi. Suddenly, a buddy slapped my shoulder hard and pointed towards the hotel ahead, saying, "William, look! Isn't that Emily, who has been chasing you for the past half-month?" I looked in the direction he pointed and saw Emily and Robert walking out of the hotel, chatting and laughing. Their smiles were particularly dazzling under the streetlights, like two knives piercing straight into my heart. I don't know why, but my heart felt like it was pricked by a needle. Over the past half-month, Emily has changed a lot towards me. She has been surprisingly kind, making me wonder whether she truly loved me in the 50 years of our last life, but now it seems I was just overthinking. Just then, Emily also saw me, and her face instantly turned pale, like a child caught in the act of doing something wrong. However, she quickly regained her composure and hurried towards me, her steps a bit frantic. Robert followed behind her, looking equally puzzled. I looked at them and couldn't help but sneer, thinking to myself, they can't wait this much, before even graduating high school, dangling me along while going to a hotel with their childhood friend. I remember she's only 18, and Robert is a year younger than her. At this age, without a driver's license, riding a motorcycle all day and hanging out in the streets, what kind of good person could he be? Birds of a feather really do flock together. Emily ran breathlessly in front of me, looking at my cold face, and hurriedly explained, "William, listen to me." "Emily, are you being hypocritical? I already said, since heaven has given you a chance, you should be with your childhood sweetheart. Why do you have to cling to me?" I interrupted her angrily. At that moment, a taxi happened to come by, and I quickly reached out to hail it. Letting out a cold snort, without looking at her again, I jumped into the car and urged the driver to hurry up and leave this place that made me uncomfortable. Sitting in the car, watching the streets outside the window recede, my tears still flowed uncontrollably. After all, I had loved Emily for 50 years. Such feelings are not so easily let go. Seeing her come out of the hotel with another man today, even though I had a premonition in my heart, the feeling of heartbreak still surged over me like a roaring wave, almost drowning me. I kept asking myself, clearly I wanted to distance myself from her. Why do I still care about her so much? As soon as I got home, I felt like I had lost my soul, dragging my heavy footsteps through the door. My father heard the sound of the door opening and immediately came over, his eyes filled with anticipation, as he asked me, "Why didn't Emily come back with you?" For the past half-month, Emily had been like a part of our family, living at my house, going to and from school with me every day. We were inseparable, like siblings. I heard my father's words, and it felt as if something had tightly tugged at my heart, letting out a long sigh. This sigh seemed to release all the helplessness and exhaustion I had been holding inside. I looked up and said to my father seriously, "I want to go out for a while and come back when the college entrance examination is over." My expression was as dark as the sky before a storm, and my tone was icy, without a trace of anger. My father understands me. There's no need for too many words between us. A glance, an expression, can convey a lot of information. He looked at me like this, opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything, just silently nodded in agreement. He didn't offer to help me buy the plane ticket. I knew that if Emily asked, he would definitely say I bought the ticket myself to fly to the seaside. I have my reasons for doing this. My father once told me that my mother's only wish before she passed away was to see the sea. In their previous life, due to various regrets, my father was unable to fulfill this wish for my mother. After they both passed away, I scattered their ashes in the ocean. In this life, I cannot allow my father to have any regrets. I must take my mother's ashes to fulfill her wish. So I boarded a night flight with my mother's urn in hand. As the plane traversed the night sky, my thoughts were immersed in memories of my mother. After landing, I walked along the coastline, passing through one city after another. Some cities had delicate, soft beaches, where the sunlight spilled over, shimmering with golden light, as if the ground were covered in crushed gold. In other cities, massive rocks stood by the sea, with waves crashing violently against them, producing deafening sounds, as if the ocean were telling its story. Finally, I arrived in Los Angeles, the place my mother had always longed for, where she was born. Back then, she left her hometown for love, resolutely marrying my father. My mother is an extraordinarily special woman. Her intelligence and kindness are like the warm sun of spring, warming everyone around her. Just like our family-owned cosmetics company, its current development is inseparable from my mother's wisdom. Many unique formulas and creative ideas for our cosmetics originate from her inspiration. At dusk, the warm afterglow gently spreads over the beach, as if draping the earth in a layer of golden gauze. I quietly hold my mother's urn, sitting on the sand, my gaze blankly fixed on the setting sun gradually sinking in the west. The sea breeze lightly brushes by, carrying the unique salty taste of the ocean, tousling my hair, yet it cannot disperse the sorrow in my heart. On a nearby lounge chair sat a mother and her son. The young boy looked about 15 or 16, with the unique youthful innocence and naivety still on his face. He hung his head low, his eyes red and swollen, clearly having just gone through a significant blow, completely immersed in immense sadness like an injured little beast. With a choked voice, he helplessly said to his mother, "Mom, why doesn't the girl I like me? Is there really a girl in this world who would like me?" His eyes were filled with confusion and helplessness, as if he had fallen into a dark abyss from which he could not escape, unable to find any way out. The mother looked at her son, her eyes filled with tenderness and affection. She reached out her hand and gently stroked her son's head, as if that hand carried an endless power of maternal love. The corners of her mouth lifted slightly, revealing a faint smile, and she softly said, "Silly child, when Mommy first met Daddy, I was also a girl as big as you." Hearing these words, my heart trembled violently, as if struck by a heavy hammer. Those memories I had buried deep in my heart surged forth like a flood breaking through a dam. Tears uncontrollably streamed from my eyes, flowing freely down my cheeks. I recalled my experiences over the course of my life. For a full 50 years, I loved Emily wholeheartedly and gave everything for her, yet I never received her genuine response. If my mother were still alive, and knew that I had so persistently clung to a love without a future, spending so many long years in vain, how heartbroken she would be. I could almost see the sorrowful look in my mother's eyes, and in that moment my emotions completely unraveled. Tears fell continuously, like beads from a broken string, accompanied by sobs. I kept asking myself, "Mom, what am I not doing well enough? Why have I put in so much effort, yet still failed to receive the affection of love? For 50 years, I have poured all my love and energy unreservedly into Emily. No matter how fierce the storms, I would appear by her side without hesitation whenever she needed me. Yet her heart was like a cold, hard stone, remaining unmoved. I couldn't help but sigh in my heart. Do I really not deserve to have love? Mom, I miss you so much." At this moment, tears continuously fell onto my mother's urn, each drop filled with my pain and regret. Suddenly, a faint sound of crying came from beside me. The cry was like a gentle string on a soft instrument, lightly plucked, looking at the strings of my heart. Next, I felt a hand resting on the urn in my hands. A familiar voice said, "Mom, don't worry. I will take good care of William in this life. I swear." Hearing this sound, I instinctively turned my head. What came into view was Emily, her face streaked with tears, the tears flowing freely down her once beautiful face, her hair a bit disheveled. She tightly grasped her mother's urn with both hands, crying uncontrollably. I was startled by her sudden appearance and actions, instinctively wanting to get up. But before I could fully stand, she suddenly hugged me tightly, crying as she said, "William, give me a chance to finish what I'm saying, okay? I'm done now, and if you still want to leave me, I promise I won't bother you again." I looked at her, my heart filled with mixed emotions. Once, in my youth and ignorance, I was captivated by her beauty and grace, joyfully accepting the marriage proposal. But now, after enduring so much pain, I truly don't know if I can trust her again." Emily saw that I did not refuse and quickly wiped her tears with her hand. Her eyes were red, like ripe cherries. She took a deep breath, her eyes rimmed with red, and said, "William, I know you've always thought I liked Robert. It was like that in the last life, and you think so in this life too. But you are wrong. Very wrong. I have never said that I like Robert, and I don't know where you heard that from. Robert and I grew up together as childhood friends. That's true, but that doesn't mean we love each other. In my previous life, I really didn't like you at first, because I didn't want to be a tool for a marriage of family business cooperation, which is why I treated you poorly. But later, after I got pregnant, didn't you notice that my attitude towards you changed significantly? When you asked me for a divorce at that time, I didn't agree. Did you think it was just because of the child? In fact, it was because I had slowly started to like you. Did you know, in the past, the affairs of our two companies felt like heavy mountains, making it hard for me to breathe. I not only had to handle company matters, but also frequently traveled abroad to perform on the violin. Those days were truly exhausting. Every time I returned utterly worn out, all I wanted was to rest well. Moreover, I didn't care about those expensive, luxurious designer bags and jewelry. Have you noticed that the ring and bracelet I always wore were bought for me at a roadside stall the first time you took me shopping? In my heart, those little accessories are far more precious than those expensive brand-name items. Hearing her say this, I suddenly felt as if I had awakened from a dream. Upon careful reflection, it was indeed the case. Although there were countless expensive pieces of jewelry at home, she always wore those two simple little trinkets that I bought. She saw me lost in thought, knowing I was reminiscing about the past, and continued, "So many years have passed. Even an iceberg should have melted in our long time together. Besides, I'm not an iceberg. You've been so good to me, how could I possibly feel nothing? Do you remember in our last life, before you passed away, you asked me if I'd ever loved you? At that time, I hesitated. Not because I didn't love you, but because I really wasn't good at expressing my feelings. Even in my old age, I'm still this stubborn. At that time, I was just thinking about how to organize my words to better express my feelings for you. But I didn't expect that you would." As she spoke, Emily started crying again. She waved her hands in the air, hitting me a bit in anger and grievance, but not with much force. Through her tears, she said, "Who told you to leave so quickly without my permission? How could you die? I hadn't even had the chance to say goodbye before you left. Do you know, the day you passed away, I cried all night long. My eyes were swollen from crying. I cried myself to sleep, and when I woke up again, I found that I had been reborn. In this lifetime, I don't want to wait for you to come find me anymore. I want to take the initiative to find you. But you bastard! Not only are you fierce with me, but you also yell at me, always so indifferent towards me. It was only after playing basketball that day that I realized you had been reborn too. I know you had a hard time in your past life because of me, but did you think it was easy for me? I've given you 2 sons and 2 daughters, and I have also helped you manage the family business. Can't you understand me a little more?" After she finished speaking, she threw herself into my arms and cried like a child again. I listened to her recounting, and the door of memories slowly opened, as those past moments surged to the forefront of my mind like a tide. Although she had not treated me well before, she was indeed very family-oriented. When her family became a giant in the industry, she did not forget to lend our family a hand. Aside from her attitude towards me, she really did well in other aspects. I looked at Emily, who was crying in my arms, filled with complex emotions. In the end, I sighed and gently placed my hand on her back, slowly soothing her. After a while, her emotions began to calm down a bit. She lifted her head, her eyes red, as she looked at me and said, "It wasn't what you think at the hotel that day. Robert's grandparents came from the county, and since they couldn't stay at his house, I took them to the hotel to get a room. Robert just went with me. Robert and I are really just ordinary friends. We grew up together, but we have never had any romantic feelings for each other. Robert only sees me as a sister. If you don't believe me, come back to my hometown with me right now. All my friends, neighbors, and my parents know about this. In my previous life, I did hear someone say that her family broke her and Robert apart for business cooperation, and then made her marry me. But over the years, I never took the time to verify this, and it became a knot in my heart. Now, seeing her explain so sincerely, I feel a bit shaken. Emily saw me hesitating and directly took out her phone to make a call, shouting into the phone, "Get over here right now!" Before long, I saw Robert running over in a panic from behind a nearby trash can. He was out of breath, and his hair was a mess. Emily tightly hugged me, as if declaring her sovereignty to the world, and said, "Call me sister-in-law." Robert seemed a bit afraid of Emily. He shrank his neck and quickly shouted to me, "Brother-in-law!" Later, under Robert's explanation, I came to understand his situation. It turned out that his parents rarely cared for him, and if it weren't for Emily constantly restraining and guiding him, he might have become a street thug long ago. Moreover, he has a girl he likes, the daughter of the owner of a restaurant he often visits. They are the same age and have agreed to get married when the time is right. It was only then that I suddenly realized why Emily invited me to Robert's wedding in our last life. And I didn't go out of spite. It turned out that his bride was the daughter of the restaurant owner, and he had long had someone in his heart. The owner initially disapproved of her dating someone like him, who was not serious about his career, so she kept obstructing them. Later, in order to be with the girl he loved, Robert worked hard to return to school, and even got into an ordinary second-tier university. It was only after the owner saw his transformation that she agreed to their marriage. After figuring all of this out, I felt a huge weight lift off my heart, and I instantly felt much lighter. At this point, the sun had completely set, and darkness enveloped the earth. Emily looked at me with eager eyes and said seriously, "In this lifetime, I don't plan to touch the violin again. I want to fulfill our father's wish and promote our mother's cosmetics to the whole world. William, can you give me this opportunity?" Hearing her say that, I felt particularly good. I slowly stood up, holding my mother's urn, and walked towards a hotel. After taking a few steps, I noticed that Emily hadn't followed, so I turned back to look at her. I saw her standing still, her eyes fixed on me, filled with deep affection and anticipation. I called out to her, "Come on, it's very cold by the sea at night. Don't catch a chill." Emily's face instantly blossomed with a radiant smile. She ran over to me like a joyful little deer, immediately linking her arm with mine and gently resting her head on my shoulder. At that moment, Robert also ran over, a bit awkwardly saying, "Sister, brother-in-law, I can't book a room with my ID. I have nowhere to stay. What should I do?" Emily pointed to a nearby spot and smiled, saying, "There's an archway over there. You can make do with it tonight. Today is the most important moment for me and your brother-in-law, so I can't worry about you." After speaking, Emily hurriedly pulled me towards the hotel. Time flies, and one sunny day, a few months later, I looked at the 2 admission letters in my hands, feeling a surge of emotions. Due to only having 3 months to review, it was indeed too difficult to aim for a top-tier university. I only managed to get into an ordinary first-tier institution. However, without Emily's help during this time, I might not have even been able to get into a second-tier school. As for Emily, because she was in a happy mood from being in a relationship with me, she performed exceptionally well and stood out in the college entrance examination, becoming the top scorer, but she chose not to attend a top university in the country. Instead, she decided to go to the same school as me. Emily sat next to me, suddenly kissed me, her face beaming with a happy smile, and said to me, "In this lifetime, how about I have 2 more children for you?" I looked into her loving eyes, my heart filled with warmth and happiness, and smiled as I nodded and said, "Okay, I loved her for 50 years. What does it matter to love her for another 50 years? As long as we are truly together, everything is worth it."